Hello, welcome to the Best Games Period. This is the show where usually every week we choose one game and we talk about, what might make it one of the best games of all time, right? And so that's a pretty big question. And last week we had plans to do a full normal episode. Those plans kind of fell through, just schedules being what they are and conditions of people being what they are. We just never, Naomi and I never got around to doing that. And so this is kind of my way of trying to put something out there this week, and I was racking my brains as to what I could talk about, because usually what we would do is record an honorable mention, and honorable mention is usually reserved for a game that's not quite we know it's not going to be one of the best games period, but we like it a lot, and we just want to talk about why we like it, right? So I thought about doing one of those, and I had a couple ideas, but then and I'll get more into this, but then I figured that this week would just be a good week to talk about Cadence of Hyrule, which came out very recently, so it kind of breaks the rules of what we usually talk about on this show. Usually we talk about stuff that has been out for a while, had some time to kind of sink in, people have kind of developed their opinions and criticism of the game, and we then kind of talk about all that interesting stuff. That's part of what I think makes our show interesting. And so I decided that there was a game that came out, or I guess sort of a game. It's a free game, came out a couple years ago? A year ago? Anyway, The Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit. And I talked a little bit about that on this show, and it, right after it came out, with just some thoughts about how the game presented its scenario. And I figured that this week would be a good week to talk about Cadence of Hyrule, because frankly, things suck right now. It sucks for everyone. Everyone seems like they're scared or on edge or deeply, deeply worried about something going on in their lives, and that seems to be a really pervasive mindset, a pervasive situation for a lot of people. Maybe not everyone, but a lot of people. And I think over the weekend that was really exacerbated by the mass shootings that took place. And the sad part about that statement that I just said is it could apply to almost any weekend in the United States. And so I don't know what it is particularly about this point in time where it just seems to be hitting so much harder. And it should hit hard. It's a horrible, horrible thing. And by its nature, we don't know when or where it's going to happen next. And so I think everyone is on edge about that, at least in the United States. And that kind of got me thinking that it would be nice to talk about something that's just nice. And I think something that stands as a really useful tool, a really useful, not even a tool, that's not really the right word for what I'm wanting to say, but stands as something that can help us through dark times. And I'm not going to sit here and talk about how Cadence of Hyrule is one of the best games of all time. Although I certainly think that Crypt of the Necrodancer deserves a good conversation all of its own eventually on this show, like a full episode. But there's something special about the Cadence of Hyrule. And I guess this is an episode where I'm going to get really personal. I've been in a really, really dark place for the last couple weeks. And I struggle a lot with anxiety problems. And I think I might have mentioned this on the Stardew Valley episode, which is one of our most popular episodes of all time. Check it out. I think it's episode 93 or something. But I tend to downplay how much of a problem I have with anxiety, because no one really wants to hear that you're too anxious to do something or like too nervous or like you're gonna freak out if you do something. And so I've gotten really, really good at hiding it and really good at not addressing the problem. And usually I'm fine. Usually I can make it through the day just fine. I can keep my head down, work, and everything's fine. But I also struggle with depression, and and for me, like, depression manifests in a lot of people in a lot of different ways. Some people get angry when they're depressed. Some people lose the ability to, like, get out of bed when they're depressed. Some people, it varies. So for me, when I get depressed, I am one of those people who kind of shuts down. But because I have this anxiety problem too, I tend to, when that happens, have a flare-up of anxiety where I fixate on something. It could be a situation, it could be a task, it could be any number of things. Sometimes it's exercise, and sometimes, and like, that's maybe good for me, probably not, not mentally anyway. But what I'm getting at is I have been really struggling with anxiety and depression. And so for me, when I shut down, at least in the past, what would happen is basically I would shut down and then focus on one task and not think about anything else. And the form that could take was usually playing video games. And I think in this way, video games for me were very therapeutic. They gave me an outlet to fixate on in a way that wasn't toxic and bad to those around me. And so in the past, what it would look like when I had one of these flare-ups would be I would sit down, I would eat junk food, and then I would play League of Legends for 12 hours straight. And I was telling one of my friends about this over the weekend, and actually friend of the show, Kazuma Hashimoto. And he said something that really struck me, because I was explaining this situation, and he said, "Oh, that's dissociation. That's what you were doing." And it went off in my head that, yeah, me sitting down and playing a game for a crazy long amount of time when I'm in that state is not a normal thing. Like, I don't normally do that if I'm feeling fine. And I don't know, it helped to have a name for this situation. And I'm transgendered. So one of the things for me that is difficult about my transition, because I've only been transitioning for a couple years and only on hormones for like a year and 4 months ish. um, and I sorry, this is difficult for me to parse and put into words. I had trouble adjusting to how things feel. And what I mean by that is when you start hormones, I can't speak for the trans masculine experience, but the trans feminine experience is basically when you start hormones, a lot of the way you experience emotions and a lot of the way you experience even physical sensations changes quite a lot. And usually it's in little benign ways. And over time, those little things kind of add up, and like you find that you are experiencing life in a totally different capacity. So like, for example, I started hormones. I've been on hormones for a while now. If I never had a problem standing up before. If I stand up really fast now, I get lightheaded. Like that's just a physical thing that I live with now because the muscular nature of my body has changed. And that's just one small example. But pertinent to what I was just talking about, the way I experience emotions and has also changed, and the way that I experience my depression and anxiety has also changed, which is a little difficult to deal with sometimes. For example, when this wave hit, I spent an entire week in like just kind of a zombie state, and then it kind of culminated in me laying in bed, lights off, crying, and playing Fire Emblem. Like just kind of alternating between it's time to cry, time to play Fire Emblem, time to cry, time to play Fire Emblem. Manage to take a shower, manage to get something to eat, cry, more Fire Emblem. And obviously that's not good. But there was just so much going on this weekend. Like outside of just my personal issues and my personal life and the way I can't help but feel when I have depression and anxiety flare-ups like that. The ESA leaked a bunch of personal information for journalists and people who attended E3, and I attended E3. And I am worried that something bad is going to happen to me because of that now. I very much remember what happened during Gamergate several years ago. Several of my friends were deeply affected by that. One of them had to change her name and go into hiding, and now no longer works in games, but won't even let me take a picture of her dog to post on social media when I manage to see her, because people might recognize her dog and find her again. So I'm well aware of what these leaks can do to people. And I'm well aware that as a trans person, I am uniquely vulnerable to that stuff. Obviously, there are more people who are vulnerable than I am. I'm just going to move this a little bit so I'm talking into it a little bit more clearly. But I'm well aware of what this can turn into very quickly for me. And then there's all of these mass shootings that remind me that I am very much a target of violence for people who consider themselves supremacists or Nazis or whatever. I'm one of those people that they hate. I'm one of those people that some lawmaker will blame as like a symptom in need of divine punishment. And I guess in the case of divine punishment, they mean hateful bigot with a gun. So there's just a lot of badness and a lot of stuff that's hard to put into words. I'm just tired. I'm so tired. And I'm not going to pretend that I have answers. And I think that there are interesting debates to be had, and I wish that the conversation could move on from, video games don't create mass murderers, which is a fairly obvious thing. But I think that there are interesting discussions that get held up at that roadblock because for whatever reason we can't get past the idea, this boogeyman, that certain political figures like to trot out and point to as the culprit, the reason these hateful bigots go on their shooting sprees, rather than the hatred and bigotry. But I guess it's just very crushing. And especially, again, I struggle with mental illness. My anxiety and depression are mental illnesses. It's not normal for someone to dissociate for 12 hours and play a video game. However, I will say that my life is tangibly better because I had those video games to kind of cling on to and find some sort of shelter and solace within. Those digital spaces allowed me, and continue to allow me, to a large extent, to not have to think about my body, to not have to think about, whatever I might be anxious about at any given point in time. I'm currently scheduled to go to PAX West, and anytime I think about that, I feel terrified. I get anxious. I start thinking about all of the things that I'm going to need to do in order to be safe, in order to get to my destinations, and like this trip to PAX West isn't even supposed to be like a hugely intensive work assignment. I'm mostly just going to scope it out to see if, hey, maybe we want to cover it in the future. But that's the way I am, right? It's one of the things I live with. It's one of the things I deal with. And one of the ways that I deal with this is by playing games. Now, what does all of this have to do with Cadence of Hyrule? Why have I spent 20 minutes talking about all of these problems? I guess just because one of the things I love about Cadence of Hyrule is that, for me, as someone with anxiety, I have always found rhythm and knowing what to do and kind of knowing the rules of something to be very helpful in getting my anxiety under control. And so that's why I loved League of Legends, because that game has this very definite repetitive rhythm across, and again, it's drawn out across, 40 minutes per game, 45 minutes per game, but it's something where I know the steps, I can kind of zone out and play it, and it's still fun and engaging, and it keeps my attention focused. And to a large extent, that's why I love Cadence of Hyrule so much. And it's been hard for me to write a review and encapsulate these feelings, and so I'm kind of just word vomiting my thoughts in this podcast form. But video games are... Well, let me back up. So Cadence of Hyrule, I should probably explain what it is and all of that jazz. So it released back in June, and it is developed by Brace Yourself Games, and it's published by Nintendo. And basically Cadence of Hyrule is a Legend of Zelda game, but it's developed by indie developers, which makes it super interesting and unique in the landscape of Zelda games. The basic premise is a magician slash bard from the future has time traveled back to Hyrule in order to create the perfect warriors to fight a future Ganon. To the great consternation of the current timeline. And the protagonist from Crypt of the Necrodancer finds herself sucked into the land of Hyrule, and at that point you can choose to play as either Link or Zelda, which is amazing. You can play as Zelda in a Legend of Zelda game, and it's good. So I obviously played Zelda, and because this is both a Legend of Zelda spin-off, but also a Crypt of the Necrodancer spin-off, it's basically Crypt of the Necrodancer, but set in the Zelda universe, and it mixes so well. So in Crypt of the Necrodancer, you have to move along, you hop from square to square on kind of this isometric grid, and you fight monsters, you go through these randomized dungeons, and kind of the catch is that everything you do has to be to the rhythm of the music of any given level, room, whatever. And that's kind of what's going on with Cadence of Hyrule, too. Except it's to music that you are relatively familiar with if you've played a Zelda game. So there's a bunch of these just bopping incarnations of classic Zelda tunes. And instead of randomized dungeons, you are making your way across this giant world map filled with secrets and treasures. And some of those treasures are locked away by requiring you to defeat every enemy on the screen in a set amount of jumps, set amount of beats. It's really cool. And almost every single, I guess, scene, that's not really the word I'm looking for, but every single room of this Legend of Zelda has something going on. There are either enemies or like a small treasure or a big secret hiding somewhere. And if you take the time to find it, it's all very rewarding and fun to do, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's not a terribly long game, but it's so good. And because this game very literally has rhythm, it takes up a lot of my concentration. So it really helps with my anxiety. And because it's Legend of Zelda, it has like this nostalgic aspect to it as well, mixed with this new take on the Crypt of the Necrodancer gameplay. And honestly, if a Crypt of the Necrodancer sequel is on the way, I really hope that they use this game as kind of like a jumping off point, because as much as randomized dungeons are kind of this thing, I think the constructed nature of the challenges in Cadence of Hyrule really benefit, or would really benefit Crypt of the Necrodancer. Yeah, I mean, that being said, I basically came away from Crypt of the Necrodancer wishing that there was more of it. I I wanted it to be a longer game. I wanted it to be I don't know. I I walked away wanting more, which is never a bad thing. I would love to see an expansion on like the side quest content in Cadence of Hyrule. There wasn't a ton that was engaging. There weren't really characters per se outside of the main villain, and like a handful of NPCs. But I guess I would love a slight expansion on that element, because I think this is something that could work like as a maybe a bigger action adventure title. There's the capacity to tell a really cool story there. And it's just such a natural fit with the Legend of Zelda universe, because every game features some sort of instrument. And I don't know, it's nice in that, yeah, there are problems in this world, but it's so colorful and friendly and boppin', like non-stop bops, that how could you not like it, you know? I don't know. It's one of those games that's definitely a light in the darkness. It's one of those things that I think people can cling to and find some measure of hope and joy within. And it's not long, and it doesn't have like necessarily the infinite replay value of something like League of Legends. Though you can, by the end of the game, you unlock the ability to replay as Candace, who's the main character from Crypt of the Necrodancer, Zelda, and Link. So you could play through the game several different times, and it sort of changes how you experience the adventure. Yeah, I don't know that I can say that Cadence of Hyrule is one of the best games, period. But it was there when I really needed it. And it might be there when you really need it too, if you have problems that are like mine. And so that's kind of why I decided I wanted to talk about it, because things seem really, really bad. And in a lot of ways, they are really bad. There's a lot of good in this world, and there's a lot of bad. And right now, things seem not great. So, play Cadence of Hyrule on Nintendo Switch, because it's unabashedly joyful. It absorbs your attention. You can't not pay attention while you're playing that game, because the music is very important. The beat is very important to how you experience it. And it's just a good time. And there's nothing wrong with seeking out that good time. So do it. I don't know. Or don't. Also, I just wanted to apologize for how we haven't really been doing a ton of these live streams. It's just been really difficult, and I think part of what needs to happen is I just need to say F it and actually live stream whenever whenever we do record. In the past, we've tried to stick with recording on Tuesdays at around 8 o'clock Central Time. That just hasn't been happening. Like, we've been recording on Saturdays, or like in the early afternoon or at 10 o'clock in the evening, or it's just kind of been all over the place. Like right now, I'm recording this at 5:30 at night on a Tuesday. And that's just kind of how it's been for a while. And that's not super conducive for people, and I know that, and I'm really sorry. But I think just kind of recording or recording live whenever we end up doing it, at whatever time we end up doing it, is something we'll do, because I think that's better than just not doing it at all. So just apologies to our backers on Patreon who have been kind of looking for that content and not finding it. I'm going to try and do better by you guys. So, that's that. Thank you for listening to this show. I know it's not really a conventional show. It got kind of personal. I didn't really talk about Cadence of Hyrule all that much. It's a very simple game, but it means so much to me because of just where I am mentally and what I struggle with mentally. It just means so much that it's hard to put into words. So I hope you all stay safe out there. And yeah, if you haven't heard of Extra Life before and you kind of want to spread some good in the world, I encourage you to head over to extra-life.org. It's a fantastic charity that helps sick and injured kids all across the US and Canada. And that's basically all it's dedicated to doing. You can participate by playing games, and if you're watching this show, you probably love playing games. So help kids and play games at the same time. Later this month is going to be Tabletop Appreciation Weekend, and we have a bunch of tabletop stuff coming over on community.extra-life.org, and I hope you'll tune in for that. All of that being said, if you're watching this live, you're already a patron. But if you're not, if you're just listening to it, head over to patreon.com/bestgamesperiod and throw us $1. You'll get access to occasional patron-only live streams. More often, those will be going to people who have backed us at higher tiers. But you'll also get access to a bunch, an archive, after a set amount of time, an archive of our unlisted live streams. And you'll also get access to a bunch of special shows that we record specifically for Patreon. I know Naomi and I are working on our third episode of the Tropes versus Women series, where we go through each video and kind of break down what is being said, and kind of what's good about it, what could be fleshed out more, all of that. Just kind of looking at it with a critical eye that should have probably been applied to it 5 years ago, but people really weren't in a... Game culture in general was not in a place to deal with that. Anyway, I feel like I'm forgetting something. Follow us on Twitter @bestgamesperiod. We also have a SoundCloud, Libsyn, and we're on Spotify now. So yay us! Hopefully we don't get banned. And all of that being said, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'm gonna stop recording now. We'll see you on the flippity dippity.